So, other than what is probably obvious to a lot of people, the high fructose corn syrup, what other sources of fructose do we have to avoid?
Well, when I say the fruit is okay, then people are thinking, well, great, I'll have that 16-ounce or 12-ounce glass of orange juice each morning because Dr. Perlmutter said that's okay. That is exactly what you do not want to do. So we've been looking at literature for years that has demonstrated that not only soft drink consumption, sugar sweetened soft drink, but fruit juice itself is associated with shrinkage of the brain and declining memory performance. We didn't really understand why until the uric acid piece of that puzzle was delivered. So, while fruit, because it has higher levels of fiber, vitamin C, quercetin, and other bioflavonoids, is reasonable, and indeed the fructose content is, as I said, 5 to 10 grams, having 36 grams of sugar in a glass of orange juice is way too much and is associated with a fairly dramatic risk of increase of uric acid. So that's off the table. I mean, if you want to have a glass of fruit juice, then dilute it significantly. You'll still get the sense that you're drinking orange juice or apple juice, but dilute it down so that you're not confronting your body immediately by a surge of fructose, which is telling your body, we're not going to have calories pretty soon. Better get ready for it. Fructose is in so many foods, as mentioned earlier, so many packaged foods, condiments, sauces, tomato paste, tomato sauce, you name it. More than half the foods that you will find on the grocery store shelf have added sweetener. And by and large, that is a form of fructose. So you have to be a conscious label reader and recognize that this is appealing to you because you have a sweet tooth. And I'm not accusing you, Jesse, of having a sweet tooth, pointing fingers. Every person walking the planet has a sweet tooth, myself included. We all love sugar. That's not an app that we loaded in after the fact. That's part of the hard drive that came when you bought your brain computer. It's part of our deepest programming to seek out sugar. Why? Because that is a powerful survival mechanism telling you eat that food at this time to get the most nutritional value out of it. And also, that's the time when that fruit is able to spread its seeds. So it worked for everyone. But by all means, we've got to become aware of the massive amount of fructose that we're eating, going from 1900s, 1920s to the present. The amount of fructose that we as Americans consume has increased from about most 15 grams per day, now about 55 grams per day. And even going from 1970 to 1990, in America, adults consume now 1,000% more fructose. It's not just the calories. It's not just that it's a sugar. It is a powerful signal to our physiology to shift from being a fat burning machine, keeping blood sugar low, to being a fat manufacturing and storage machine and keeping blood sugar high. Again, in the context of our history, that was a great mechanism. That's why we have that mechanism on board. But now we're sending wrong signals to that mechanism. And the good news is we can override that, make better choices, and recognize that the alarm signal itself is uric acid. So that is something we want to have our doctors check, or we check at home using a monitor like you can buy for blood sugar. You can buy the same thing for uric acid on Amazon or wherever you want to go, and check your uric acid. Know what it is.
So, a basic rule of thumb for people then is stick with whole foods. And then in that case, when it comes to fructose, things will basically take care of themselves.
That's right. And, there are some people who genetically may have higher uric acid. And how would you know till you check? Well, interestingly, if you go to the doctor for your so-called annual blood work and they do a 20 component panel, typically that will include uric acid. And if you ask the doctor, oh, I see my uric acid is 6.5, then she or he will say to you, oh, that's great. It's in the normal range, nothing to worry about. But you got to remember that that statement, that response is in the context of gout. Gout is a disease caused pretty much by elevation of uric acid. Generally, the cutoff for being considered normal is 7 milligrams per deciliter or above. At that level, the doctor starts to say, well, your uric acid level is higher, you're at risk for gout. Well, that's sort of your grandfather's uric acid. We now recognize, with robust research for the past 2 decades, that even subtle elevation of uric acid above 5.5 milligrams per deciliter is putting you in the risk category for all kinds of metabolic issues. One very large study in 2009 looked at 42,000 men and 48,000 women. That's 90,000 people, followed them for 8 years. At the beginning of the study, what did they do? They measured their uric acid level. End of story. And after the 8 years, they asked who died, and if you did die, what did you die of? They found that those in the higher ranges of uric acid had a 16% increased risk of death from what we call all-cause mortality, meaning they got to be dead people, who knows why. But more importantly, there was a 38% increased risk of what is called cardiovascular mortality, dying of a heart-related event, a 35% increased risk of dying of stroke. And really intriguing was their finding that for every 1 point elevation above 7, which is so common these days, each point is associated with an additional 8 to 13% increased risk in what is called all-cause mortality. That's worrisome. We now have teased apart the very straightforward mechanisms that relate elevated uric acid to these issues: dying of a heart attack, dying of a stroke. We know that elevated uric acid threatens the arteries in terms of their ability to relax and supply blood. We know that elevated uric acid increases what's called insulin resistance, so our blood sugars go up. That's a surefire way to amp up inflammation in the human body. The brain hates that. So, these are now finally coming to light. And once you've seen these mechanisms and understand them, you realize, wow, this explains so much. It explains why this was a survival mechanism and why so darn many people these days are really in bad shape. 88% of American adults has one or more of the components of what is called metabolic syndrome: the high blood pressure, the insulin resistance, the big belly, the dyslipidemia, the elevated triglycerides. That means only 1 in 8 American adults is metabolically intact. 50% of Americans over the age of 60 will have at least will have 3 of those 5 components, and therefore is diagnosable as having the metabolic syndrome. And that is an entree to so many things that you don't want to get.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
And even going from 1970 to 1990, in America, adults consume now 1,000% more fructose. It's not just the calories. It's not just that it's a sugar. It is a